I want to thank all of you for coming this afternoon to hear Governor Kaine. This is presented by the Community Relations Council of the United Jewish Federation in Tidewater. The CRC, as it's known, transforms issues into action through the community, public officials and government, the media, and other faith and ethnic groups. We would like to thank you again for coming this afternoon to help us further our mission to motivate, educate, and advocate. Now in your seats today, you'll find an invitation for an upcoming 2nd District Congressional Forum with Representatives Scott Ridgell and Paul Hirschfield. We hope to see you Thursday evening, October 25th at 7 p.m. in this very room as those candidates share with us why they deserve our votes. Also in your seats, you're going to find a blank card. If you have questions for Governor Kaine this afternoon, please write it on the card, and after his remarks, raise your hand and a volunteer will pick it up from you. Joel Rubin, who's here to host today's event, will join the governor on the stage after the remarks and will take as many of your questions as possible. We're planning to wrap this up around 1:15 so that you can get on your way back to work. Now I've got to tell you, I'm extremely honored to get to introduce Governor Kaine today because I had the pleasure of working with him closely for 3 years in Richmond. I served as Secretary of Finance, and in that role, we worked on the budget together. And if you think the budget is just a one-month process, you're way wrong. The budget goes on for most of the year. And when you're not working on the budget, you're working on tweaks to the budget. So I got to watch Governor Kaine skillfully make very hard decisions. And as you'll recall, it was a tough economic climate. And so he had a lot of hard decisions to make. He weighed the pros and cons of each choice. He understood all the facts, and no decision was too small for him to take seriously. We would spend a lot of time on $25,000 budget decisions. I can tell you firsthand that Tim Kaine shares our values. He is compassionate, he's smart, he's forward-thinking, and he makes decisions not only about today, but looking towards the future. Benefiting from his leadership, Virginia had 4 great years. During that time, we were named Best Managed State, which is a huge honor, Best State to do business, which in this economic climate is very, very important, and Best State in which to raise a child, an even higher honor than any of the others. But you didn't come here today to hear me talk about Governor Kaine. You came here to hear him answer your questions. So with this, I turn it over to Governor Kaine.
Thank you. It's so great to be here at the Sandler Center and have a chance to talk and answer your questions. I'll talk just for a few minutes. I'll begin by thanking Jody. Jody was a wonderful member of my cabinet. The Secretary of Finance job is the toughest job in the cabinet under any circumstances. But when you're in the toughest recession in 75 years, it's particularly challenging, and Jody did a magnificent job. We did a lot of good work together, and I'm so glad she's here with me. You know, let me just say a couple of things about a couple of issues, because we'll talk about all the issues that you want to talk about. I'd like to talk about the U.S.-Israel relationship. I'd like to talk about our economy. And I'd like to talk about what I think is the biggest challenge in Washington today, which is putting people in office who know how to work together. On the U.S.-Israel relationship, which is something that everyone in this room feels passionately about. I grew up in Kansas City, and if you grew up in Kansas City when I did, politics meant Harry Truman. I was born in 1958. Harry Truman lived and continued to work at the Truman Library almost until his death in the early 1970s. And of course, one of Truman's own proudest moments was when he overruled the living person he most admired, Secretary of State George Marshall, to put the United States behind the recognition of the State of Israel minutes after it was formed. So in coming to admire Truman, I came to know the story of his passion about the U.S.-Israel relationship. And it became a passion of mine. I will say that the passion was kind of a theoretical one because I'd not been to Israel. I'd not really traveled at all outside of the Middle West. I've had the chance now as an adult to go to Israel twice, and the passion is now more personal and deeper. When I was the mayor of Richmond, Teddy Kollek, the mayor of Jerusalem a number of years ago, started a tradition of bringing 50 mayors from around the world to Jerusalem every April. In April of 2000, I was one of 6 American mayors that accompanied that delegation for 9 days. We talked about mayor stuff, potholes and elections. but we also spent a lot of time learning about Jerusalem and Israel, and it was a very powerful, powerful trip. I then went back as governor in April of 2009 with my wife Ann to do economic development work with Israeli businesses, Sabra, Teva, and others that have significant Virginia presence, but also to talk about the Virginia-Israel and the American-Israeli relationship. My visit coincided with the formation of the new government, and it was within literally 10 days to 2 weeks after the new government was formed that I had the opportunity to have one-on-one meetings with the Prime Minister Netanyahu, President Perez, Tzipi Livni, Avigdor Lieberman, the new mayor of Jerusalem, Nir Barkat, and others. That passion continues to this day. The U.S.-Israel relationship is a bipartisan value, which is a very, very important thing. I consider it a bedrock principle of our party, and the Republicans have been equally supportive of the relationship. That's great. I think it has to be bipartisan for the good of our nation and the good of Israel. I want to be a strong partner with Israel if I have the fortune of being a U.S. Senator. And that partner extends to making sure that we do what we can with respect to aid to Israel, that we do what we can to make sure that Israel is secure, and that security has many, many challenges today, the principal one of which is the threat of Iran obtaining nuclear weapons. I strongly support the policy, bipartisan of this government, that a nuclear Iran is unacceptable. A nuclear Iran is threatening to Israel, but also to other nations. And it's already been made very plain that if Iran were to obtain nuclear weapons, Saudi Arabia has said they'll get them. And Turkey, though, having not announced it, it would be clear that Turkey would get nuclear weapons as well. We can't afford more nuclear proliferation in the region, and for that and so many other reasons, we've got to do everything we can and keep every option on the table to make sure that Iran doesn't get nuclear weapons. There's other security challenges, both immediately in the Palestinian territories, but also with the Arab Spring and activities in Syria and Egypt and other nations, and I look forward to the chance to get into them in some detail. One thing in particular that I would like to do for the U.S.-Israel relationship segues in my next topic, the economy. I think too many Americans who aren't necessarily passionate about the relationship, when they hear Israel, the first thing that occurs to their mind is the Middle East troubles, challenges, security problems. Americans often don't think about Israel. Wow, it's one of the most dynamic, intellectual property economies on earth. Wow, they got rid of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. They never had it, and it was fine. A country that has an innovative healthcare system, a country that does innovative things in alternative energy or desalination of water. Israel has a tremendous amount of success stories that we should be using as examples as we're wrestling with policy answers. But for too many people, Israel is just a friend in a troubled part of the world. When we think about it, we think of troubles. I want to work on education issues in the Senate. That's what I want to do, because I think if you win the talent race, you win the economic race. And one of the particular things I would like to do is be part of a group of senators that would be telling the good news story about things that are going on in Israel and sharing examples so that people can learn, but so that we can also emulate some of those examples in American policy. On the economy, I believe heavily in infrastructure investments to grow the economy. Thank goodness the Dow Jones is now at nearly its 5-year high and unemployment rate at nearly its 4-year low, but we've got more work to do. And my view on the economy is basically level the playing field for small businesses so they get treated as fair as the big guys. Invest heavily in talent and education, because it's the quality of the workforce that is the biggest determinant of economic success. And finally, be an infrastructure investor. I firmly believe that the more we invest in infrastructure, the more people we hire today, and then we enjoy the fruits of their labor for many, many years. The last thing I'll say before Joel and I take your questions and dialogue is this. I think the biggest thing we need in Washington right now is people who know how to work together. Because I don't think our nation suffers from a lack of good ideas. That's not the problem. What we suffer from is a lack of people who are willing to join together to put ideas into reality. Just in the last couple of months, you've seen great examples of this. There was a Veterans Jobs Bill that was pending before the United States Senate, and the minority in the Senate decided to filibuster it until after Election Day, even though our veterans, especially the enlisted men and women who returned from Iraq and Afghanistan, have a higher unemployment rate than the national average. All the stories I read about that filibuster suggested that the only reason for it was to make sure that nothing good happened before Election Day. That, to me, is absolutely shameful. Over the summer, now I'll praise Senate Republicans, actually. Over the summer, the Senate passed a bipartisan farm bill. Drought relief, flood insurance, school lunch programs, good for kids and good for farmers. They passed it by a bipartisan margin that was significant. But when it went over to the House decided to bottle it up and not do anything about it until after the election, because they didn't want to do anything good until after Election Day. I was the mayor of Richmond, nonpartisan, a very diverse city, about 60+% African American in Richmond. I was chosen to be mayor not because I knew the most, not because I lived in the city the longest, but people had a confidence in me as an umpire and a listener and a person who would always search for common ground without name-calling people who were in a different political posture than me. Then I became a lieutenant governor and governor. And for 6 of my 8 years in statewide service, I had 2 Republican houses to work with. And for 2 years, I had 1 house in each party. Jody mentioned accolades we received. Best managed state, best state for business all 4 years, best state to raise a child. We were not only winning accolades that are tough to win, we were winning them in the worst economy in 75 years. But it was we that were winning them. None of those accolades were Tim Kaine accolades. I didn't get my picture on a lot of magazines with that. But Virginia won just about every accolade there was to win in the toughest economy we've suffered through in 75 years because we knew how to work together. That doesn't mean we always agree. Families, hey, there's disagreement. There's disagreement on any PTA council or on any organization. And I have disagreements with my legislature, not just Republicans either. I disagree with Democrats too. But what we were able to do is put the disagreements on the table, try to find a point of agreement. Often we could, sometimes we couldn't. But when we couldn't, we stayed friends so that we could wake up tomorrow and try to find something else to agree on. I will take that with me into the U.S. Senate. Last thing, and then I'll sit down. When John Warner was in the Senate, he was a proud Republican, but he was part of the gang of 14 in the Senate, 14 Dems and Rs who had worked together to break through log jams. Mark Warner is now in the Senate, a proud Democrat, but part of the gang of 6, which I think now has just grown to a gang of 8, that is working together to break through log jams to make things happen. I will make this pledge to you. If the gang is 6, or 8, or 14, or 98, or 2, I'm going to be part of it. Because I think we've got to build bridges if we're going to move forward. We can't move forward if we don't join together, and that's what I will be a part of if I have the honor of being your next U.S. Senator. Thanks very much. Great to be with you.
George Allen, George, I'm going to call you Tim.
That's good.
That's okay.
We've known each other a while, too.
We have, and my brother Mark worked as one of Tim's policy advisors and then as counselor, so he worked with Jody in the administration. My nephew used to raid the refrigerator in the governor's mansion quite often, and he's best friends with Tim's son Nat, who is going into the Marines soon, was in ROTC. So our families have been close. We've been at Simcha's together, so it's an honor to be here. In fact, I was with your wife last night at the Kiwanis Harbor Party and Trafe Fest over at down at Town Point Park. So Ann's doing well. I don't know how often you see your wife between now and November.
November 7th. We have
November
a date on the 7th
of the day. But last night she was doing.
Joel and I get along so well that he told me when I came up, he said, I'm going to cut this thing off quickly because I got to go to the Nats-Cardinals game tonight. Yes. And you are a second best priority in my life.
Yes. As soon as my daughter called me this morning from Washington and says, Dad, please come up to the game. We'll find you tickets. You became a sort of second thought to me. And, there's a lot of baseball fans in this audience today. And tonight's going to be great. The Yankees-Orioles at 5. This game tonight. So anyway, it's good to be with you.
Thank you.
Great to be with you. And I got a number of questions that have come. And let me just recognize Wally Earp, who's running for mayor of Virginia Beach. He's sitting here in the front row right here. Charlie Stanton's here from Jim Webb's office. You would be succeeding Jim if you win this election. I think he's been an outstanding senator here for the Commonwealth of Virginia. I don't see any other of our electeds or candidates or anything, if I've missed anybody.
Susan
Hirschfield is here, yes.
Great friend.
Saw Paul and Susan last night. Here as well, and Paul and Scott Ridgel will be here on the 25th, that evening, for a debate right here on the stage. So please come back for that. And I want to thank Advanced Video Service for the use of one of their microphones, and I think that's about all I have to do at this point. You raised the issue about Iran. A lot of people here are concerned about that. And everybody's talking very tough about Iran shouldn't have a nuclear weapon. And I think last night in the debate, the vice presidential debate, I think that issue came up. And I think Vice President Biden was sort of challenging Paul Ryan about, do you want another war in the Middle East? And I don't think any of us want another war in the Middle East. And we also don't want Iran to have a nuclear weapon. So tell me how far Tim Kaine thinks the United States ought to go. And should the United States be making its decision to sort of being driven by Israel to a certain extent? Where's the gap?
We have to have all options on the table. And let's just start first with the proposition about why a nuclear Iran is unacceptable and then what the U.S. should do. A nuclear Iran just has such a destabilizing possibility, certainly to Israel. I mean, Iran is a country that's run by Holocaust deniers who not only deny the reality of human history and Holocaust, but also even recently, Ahmadinejad, in the speech at the United Nations, continued the always bellicose language about the need for Israel not to exist. So it is very threatening to Israel, but I think it demeans the importance of the issue and frankly puts too much of this on Israel's shoulders to say, well, this is all about the safety of Israel. It's not just about the safety of Israel. It is a much, much bigger issue. As I alluded to in the opening statement, if your neighbor gets nuclear weapons and you don't like your neighbor, as much as you don't want to get nuclear weapons, you're going to get them. And so Saudi Arabia has made it very plain that they would likely purchase nuclear weapons if Iran got nuclear weapons. And Turkey, though not having announced it, would almost certainly do the same thing. When I went to Israel in April of 2009 as governor, I also went to Morocco and the UAE. And what struck me as fascinating is if I closed my eyes when I was in meetings, the concern about Iran and a nuclear Iran was exactly the same, and I didn't know which country I was in. Morocco, even though it's somewhat distant from Iran, had just kicked the Iranian embassy out of Morocco for trying to destabilize their government. The UAE, much closer to Iran, very, very nervous about a nuclear Iran. So we have to take this position that containment isn't an option, and that we need to undertake steps to make sure that Iran never gets nuclear weapons. Now we get to the hard part, which is exactly what to do and when. As you all know, there is vigorous debate, even just within Israel, about the current status of the Iranian program and the merits of continued push on financial and other sanctions and how long those should go forward before we really talk seriously about military options. There's ongoing work that's being done between the U.S. and Israel, and I know this is still in the alleged stage, but I think everyone acknowledges that it's happening, with the U.S. and Israel planning the Stuxnet virus into the Iranian nuclear program to delay work on these centrifuges and the enrichment of uranium for use in military nuclear purposes. So we need to keep every option on the table, including military options, but we need definitely, and I think everyone agrees that we need definitely to exhaust every option short of military option.
Well, last night during the debate, it seemed like Vice President Biden was saying that the threat is not nearly as imminent as it's being made out to be by others, that Iran doesn't have a way to deliver, a weapon and such. I mean, how close do you think we are? And are you concerned that Israel may take or may strike Iran, putting the United States into a position of having to make a decision about what to do next?
I definitely believe this notion of red lights and green lights. Nobody has a right to put a red light before Israel to defend itself. I mean, Israel needs to make its own decisions. Israel needs always to have the freedom to make its own decisions to defend itself, just as it did with respect to wiping out a nuclear program in Syria a number of years ago. Israel needs to have the right to make that decision, and we should never say otherwise. By the same token, the U.S. should not take military action under any circumstance unless we feel comfortable, we feel a degree of comfort that it is the time for military action. And we have had the experience of a nation, and this is something that factors into the whole ether of undertaking military action against another nation in the region to stop a nuclear program that once we were there was found not to exist. So that means that America's got to be able to kick the tires on the intelligence side to make our own decision about what we do. Now, one thing we definitely should do, we would always defend Israel. We would always defend Israel against its enemies. And so if Israel were to decide that to take unilateral action and that were to inspire some kind of attack or threat to Israel, we're going to stand with Israel. But we need to make our own intelligence decisions about the moment that the U.S. military is involved. And obviously what that means, that the most important thing is communication. Because Israel has intelligence, and we have intelligence, and EU nations have intelligence, and the best decisions will be made by all of us to the degree to which we share the intelligence we have and we kick it around. I followed, I'm not an expert in this area, but even the debate within Israel, statements by prominent Shin Bet and IDF members about the status of the Iranian nuclear program suggest that there's a lot of differences of opinion in Israel, even on the sort of scientific question about where exactly Iran is. Well, we ought to be sharing our concerns, we ought to be sharing our intelligence, we ought to be talking through, but it's all toward this goal of stopping Iran from getting nuclear weapons has to be, one of the, if not the paramount, contemporary American sort of foreign policy goals.
David Leon has a good question here about the United States and the changing situation in Egypt, the rise of the Muslim Brotherhood, and how the United States should respond to that. Because obviously the United States has been giving a lot of military aid to Egypt to free Muslim Brotherhood. How do you think the United States ought to be approaching what's going on in Egypt right now?
It's very delicate, and I don't think it's the kind of thing where you just make decisions quickly or lightly. You really have to wrestle with what's occurring. Obviously, the degree to which the new Egyptian government takes seriously its responsibility to protect Americans, to protect American embassies, to maintain the relationship with us, that's a critical component to what we ought to do. The degree to which Egypt honors its commitments, its treaty commitments to Israel and the safety of Israel, that's critically important. It is the case that the new Egyptian leadership is from the Muslim Brotherhood. That is a case, and we should be troubled about it. And yet it's also the case that leadership is American educated, with children who are United States citizens because they were born in the United States in California when he was attending university in California. So the leadership does have some connections to American culture, American institutions, and understanding for American democratic traditions. That fact is actually a positive. That would suggest that there are relationships and ties of history that we ought to be using to make sure that Egypt continues to honor its obligations to Israel and its relationship with the United States. Any aid that we give is aid that has to have the prospect of conditions if folks that we are providing aid to are not behaving in the right way. And that doesn't mean that everybody has to behave exactly as we would behave. It's a big, complicated world, and cultures are different, and there has to be some latitude for those differences and subtle understanding of them. But any aid that we give, I think Congress and the White House needs to be in a position to condition it if the countries are suggesting that they're going to pursue bellicose or bellicose strategies or other strategies that would weaken peace or harm relationships.
Kaine Hollendorf's asking about, in your opinion, what are persuasive enough reasons for any American Jewish not to vote Democratic in this election season? But let me tie it in somewhat to the discussion we're having right now, because obviously you are very close with President Obama.
Yep. Joel knows, but some may not. The president's mother and grandmother are from the same farm town in Kansas that my mother and grandmother are from, El Dorado, Kansas. So, the likelihood of that is pretty tiny, and yet when I first met him and I heard him talk about his father's from Kenya and his mother's from farm town in Kansas, I couldn't resist, well, what farm town? And then we found that out. So that has built a kind of a relationship outside of politics, and I've gotten to know him fairly well.
And he considered you to be his vice president back in 2008, which was, of course, a great high honor for you and for Virginia. And then you became the chairman of the Democratic National Committee while you were governor of Virginia. And I would presume, you can correct me if I'm wrong, that he probably urged you to run for this Senate seat.
He actually didn't, but
he's happy you are.
But a whole lot of people did, and I think he's probably happy that
he's probably happy that you are. But as you know, President Obama is not favored by a lot of American Jews. They're questioning whether he really is a friend of Israel. He went and spoke in Cairo after he became president. And there is this sort of issue out there about whether President Obama really has the gut feeling for Israel that you described, that you had, in fact, in Kansas. And so tell me what you think. Is President Obama really a friend of Israel? Do American Jews have a right to be concerned about that?
Let me answer that question. And then the broader question was also sort of why vote for President Obama across the board. So I'll answer the bigger one. But let me start with, is the President a friend of Israel? I believe very strongly that he is. We've talked about the U.S.-Israel relationship, and it is something he has that strong feeling that Israel is our ally in a very difficult part of the world. That same feeling about the importance of the relationship, the value of Israel in itself and also as an ally, and the importance that Israel plays in a region that over time we would hope would become more small d democratic, and Israel is the great example in the region of how a small d democracy, vibrant, thriving, a lot of contentious debate just like ours, but how that can work. The president is also very, very close to one of the immediate past presidents of AIPAC, Rosie Rosenberg, who's gotten to be a very good friend from Chicago. And Rosie and I have spent a lot of time together as well, talking about his relationship with the president, his own interactions with the president on issues dealing with Israel. He feels the same way I do. I've gotten to be fairly close to the current Israeli ambassador to the United States, Michael Oren. I did a lot of work with Salai Meridor when he was ambassador, and when he was leaving and Michael Oren was coming in, I had a chance to get to know Michael Oren and have worked together with him on a number of initiatives, some dealing with Virginia when I was governor, but actually some dealing with the administration. They have occasionally called me when the direct channel wasn't the right way to do something, and sometimes a friend channel was the better way to do something. The ambassador has reached out to me on occasion, and I've been happy to do that. I think Ambassador Oren's view is that at many levels, especially in the security cooperation between the U.S. and Israel, it's never been better. I've heard Ambassador Oren say that, and I've also heard Ehud Barak say that. And I believe that to be true. Things like U.S., not only the tradition of support through congressional foreign aid, but the U.S. work together with Israel in the Iron Dome security initiative, the U.S. work on Stuxnet and delaying the Iranian nuclear program. These are very challenging and difficult projects, and the U.S. has been right there at the table to make them happen. And that wouldn't happen if the president had any equivocation about the support for the relationship. Obviously, one thing I think we would all wish is that there was more warmth in the relationship between the president and Prime Minister Netanyahu. You know, that I think, to the degree that there's concern or angst, that might be one thing that would create concern or angst, and that relationship isn't necessarily a close one. And many folks, have the belief, and that the Prime Minister, has a strong preference in the presidential election, and it's not President Obama. But look, I know from politics, you don't have to be buddy-buddy with people that you're nevertheless doing good work with. And sometimes personalities are different. I have a personality that's a certain kind, and somebody else may have a different one. That doesn't mean we can't do good work together. We don't have to be chums to do good work together. More broadly, Joel, what I'll say is this. So if the question is, why should Americans vote for the president, and I hope they will, and I hope Virginians will too, I'll go back to that question that everybody was talking about around the time of the convention. Are we better off than we were 4 years ago? And I believe that while we're not where we want to be yet, 4 years ago we were in 2 wars that were blank check, open-ended, with no real particular game plan about where they were going. And bin Laden and most of the Al-Qaeda leadership were not only free, but the trail was completely cold, and we weren't really making much effort to go after them. The stock market was in a free fall in the 6s and 7s. GDP was shrinking. And we were losing 750,000 jobs a month with both a fiscal and a manufacturing auto industry that were on the verge of being carved up and shuttered. That was where we were 4 years ago. We're out of Iraq. We're drawing down in Afghanistan. We've got bin Laden and most of the Al-Qaeda leadership. The auto industry is rebounding and thriving, not just rescued, but reformed with better CAFE and environmental standards. The financial system is stabilized. GDP is growing. The stock market's in the 13s, not the 6 or 7s. And we've added jobs for 31 months in a row. Now, we're not where we want to be yet, but in a whole series of areas. And I can talk about 2 great new women on the Supreme Court, or I can talk about the ending of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, or environmental emissions. In a whole series of areas, I think we are getting better. But I do believe we have a Congress that's been a shackle on the pace of our improvement. And what we need is a Congress of people who are willing to work together and find results so that we can get better faster.
We have a $16 trillion deficit, though, and an annual deficit of over $1 trillion. And everybody is, when you get to the Senate and when you get to the House, and as you work with members of the House, they're all going to be looking at ways to cut. And one of the concerns is raised by David Brain here is about foreign aid and whether only 1% of our budget is spent on foreign aid. How important do you think foreign aid is? What's your commitment to that going forward?
I'm a huge proponent of foreign aid. I lived abroad. I was a missionary in Honduras for a year in 1980 and 81, and had that opportunity. And that opportunity of living abroad, you learn a lot about abroad, but you learn more about home when you live abroad because you come face to face with things that you took for granted at home that other people don't have the advantage of. In Honduras, when I lived there, it was a military dictatorship and no one could vote for anything. Wow, that made a huge impression on me. But it also impressed me that the role of the United States is really strengthened with foreign aid. There are those who think, and I'd love to talk bigger picture about budget and sequestration and how we get our budgets in balance, but you're not going to balance the budget by dramatic cuts to things that make up less than 1% of the budget. There are those who have an attitude that foreign aid is this huge part of the budget, or that public broadcasting, for gosh sake, we can balance the budget if we just ask Big Bird and Jim Lair. That's not going to happen. Anything ought to be subject to taking out a microscope and finding savings, and especially if we're giving foreign aid to countries that are doing bad things, then we ought to condition that aid. But the aid that we give to Israel is extremely valuable. The aid that we give to other nations, extremely valuable. And a lot of foreign aid that we give isn't just valuable in relationships with other nations, it's really valuable to Americans. A lot of our foreign aid is food aid to foreign countries. And maybe the most immediate beneficiaries of that aid are American farmers. We buy their products and then we use them to help solve hunger elsewhere. So foreign aid isn't just for people overseas. An awful lot of the benefits of foreign aid are felt right here at home. We do have to, I'll segue into it if you want to, let's talk about the budget deficit.
Well, and I'd like to talk about sequestration for a second because even though I guess Mitt Romney says he didn't support that, obviously we were up against the wall there on raising the debt limit,
Sure.
And that was the compromise they came up with. I don't think anybody ever thought we would get to this point, but we are getting to that point. We're nervous here in Hampton Roads because of the implications for defense. You said you got to go after the big things. Well, defense is a big thing. Healthcare is a big thing. Talk about the big things.
Let me talk about the problem, and then sequestration is the short-term issue, and then the longer-term issue. So the problem, and Joel pretty much set the stage. We spend $3.6 trillion a year. We take in $2.3 trillion a year. So that's the problem. We have a $1.3 trillion annual problem right now, and it adds up to a national debt that's now $16 trillion. So how do we close that gap down? That's what we're all wrestling with. There are 2 working strategies for closing the gap that are on the table in my campaign with George Allen. I'm going to say this about George. We get along great. We don't agree on a lot of things. We've always gotten along fine. We are equally as sincere and proud about our views, but we just differ on a lot of things. And here is one example. How do we close that gap? My opponent says make all the Bush tax cuts permanent first. That widens the gap. And then close the gap by basically pulling out the meat axe and swinging. Because he's pledged to Grover Norquist that he would never raise any taxes or revenues. So that means you close the gap all through cuts. And that means Medicare and education and infrastructure and R&D and everything. He says he would not support defense cuts. But there's no way to close a gap with 0 revenue without getting into the big line items. I have a different point of view. I think if the balance sheet is broken, you got to fix both sides of the balance sheet. When my opponent started at the beginning of the 2000s, our budget was balanced. We actually had a surplus. But within about 2 years, 2002, 2003, both sides of the balance sheet got busted because we dramatically slashed revenues and we dramatically increased spending. And that's where we are today. We got a balance sheet where both sides are broken. I think the only way to fix it is to fix both sides of the balance sheet. So what I have proposed, and now this gets into the sequestration, is let's begin by reaching an accord on the Bush tax cuts. The Democrats want to have them all expire over $250,000 of income. That's the Democratic Senate position. The Republican position in the House, my opponent, make them all permanent. We got to find a compromise. Neither side is going to suddenly wake up tomorrow and say, you know what, you're right, we're going to do exactly what you've been saying all along. That's not going to happen. So what I've said is, let's find a compromise. Let the tax cuts expire for the 500,000 income and up. So everybody gets the break to 500,000, but then they expire over that. If you do that, you raise $500 billion in revenue over the next 10 years. So you start to narrow the gap. That means the kinds of sequestration or other cuts that you have to find suddenly get cut in half, not $1 trillion. Now we're looking for half the size of the cuts. Fix one piece of the Medicare program. The prohibition in Medicare that says the federal government is not allowed to negotiate with pharmaceutical companies when we buy prescription drugs. It was a foolish thing to put in the law. No corner pharmacy, no Walmart pharmaceutical department would ever forego the opportunity to try to cut a better price in working with their supplier. If we do that, we'll save $25 billion a year. How do we know we'll save that much? Here's the thing that makes me crazy. We know what we'll save because the federal government can negotiate with the same companies to buy the same drugs when we buy them from the VA system. So we know the volume discount. If we save that $25 billion and then do one more thing, take away the tax subsidies we currently give to the big 5 oil companies, we will now, instead of $1 trillion of tax sequestration cuts by year, what we have to find is $235 billion of targeted savings over 10 years, spread across all parts of government, defense and everything else. We can find that amount of savings. I'm the only governor in modern times in Virginia, because of Jody's intense work. We left office with a smaller general fund budget than we started with. We had to make a lot of cuts. We had to find a lot of savings. Secretary Panetta says, we can find savings. Just don't give us a number that's too ugly. And don't make us save on the wrong things instead of the right things. Give us some latitude to save correctly. So with those 3 moves, Joel, what we could do is we could start to get our budget back in balance, avoid sequestration cuts, and then I think that would be a little springboard forward to, okay, now we've cut a deal to avoid sequestration. Now we can tackle the rest of the longer-term question. That would be both expense cuts and revenue reforms. When we get to the end of the day, I think we ought to be making $2 or $3 of cuts for every dollar of revenue, but I do think we need to fix both sides of the balance.
I was watching the tape of your debate with George Allen this morning. That was up in Richmond, I think it aired last week. Monday night. And the question of Obamacare came up, and George Allen was saying that it's going to add $1 trillion to the deficit. And one of the questions we got was from Jane Goldberg about your views on Obamacare. And do you believe it is going to add a significant amount to the deficit? And is that a reason that you should support? Mitt Romney says if he's elected president, there'll be no more Obamacare.
Yeah.
Tell us your views on that.
I guess there'll be no more Obamacare or Romneycare. Let me tackle the issue of Obamacare. But the way it came up in the debate the other night is George Allen and I were both asked, what are you going to do about sequestration? So I just went through those points that I just laid out and said, that's what I'm going to do. And George's point was, I'm against sequestration. We should repeal Obamacare. And if we do, we'll save $1 trillion. That's already been fact-checked as you mistook a minus for a plus. The repeal of Obamacare increases the deficit, not reduces the deficit. So his belief that if we repealed Obamacare, suddenly we wouldn't have to make sequestration cuts is actually wrong. But second and more important, because I think this is a really important thing, if we have a very difficult deadline staring us in the face, and that is sequestration cuts that would hurt the Virginia economy, hurt defense, and hurt Hampton Roads, and you say you don't like them, and what's your solution? Your solution is, we're going to repeal Obamacare. What's the likelihood that's going to happen between now and year end to avert sequestration cuts? There have already been 33 unsuccessful votes to repeal Obamacare. There's already been a 2.5-year contentious litigation that went up to the Supreme Court to try to repeal Obamacare. If your only strategy for dealing with sequestration is, I got an idea, let's repeal Obamacare, not only are you taking the numbers the wrong way, the deficit's going to get bigger, you are saying that the solution for the nation's problems is to jump right back into the most partisan, gridlocked, contentious debate that Congress has had for the last 3 years. I don't think we need more contention. I don't think we need more 35th, 36th, 37th vote to do something controversial. Now's the time for compromises. And so I have a plan on the table that's a compromise plan. My opponent has a plan on the table that's a contentiousness plan. And I have a strong feeling about what's the better way for us to go. With respect to the Affordable Care Act, you know, I supported it as a necessary first step, but not the be-all and end-all. We're a nation, and we're the best nation in the history of the world, in my view. And I'm very proud to believe that, and I believe it every day of my life, and yet 750,000 people go bankrupt every year in this country because of medical bills. That doesn't happen anywhere else. And when people go bankrupt, they're not only wiping out their medical creditors, they wipe out all the other creditors that they owe money to as well. We let 20,000 people every year die because they lack access to medical care for easily treatable medical conditions. Hey, we're all going to die. But to die because you lack access to treatable care for easily treatable medical conditions, other nations don't do that. And I don't think we should do it either, because we're proud and we're strong and we're better in so many other places. So I view the Affordable Care Act as a step forward to try to put in the rearview mirror some things that we've grown to tolerate that are actually intolerable. Things that are happening right now in the Affordable Care Act that I like, but then things that need to be fixed. I like youngsters being able to stay on family policies till age 26, not 21. I got 2 kids in the sweet spot now, and I'll have another one soon, and that's usually important. I like small businesses being able to take advantage of a tax credit to buy health insurance for their employees. I like seniors being able to get free preventive care under Medicare and have a prescription drug benefit that costs them less. I like insurance companies not being able to beat people over the head if they have a pre-existing condition. And I like them not being able to charge women premium differentials in insurance policies just because they're women. I like the fact that 600,000 Virginians this year got rebate checks from their insurance companies because their insurance companies overcharged them. And because of the Affordable Care Act, if they overcharge and they don't spend the premium money on medical care, they got to rebate money back. The average premium rebate check was $115. So I don't want to repeal the Affordable Care Act, because to repeal it would take all of those things and get rid of them, and I want to keep them. Now what I want to do is I want to continue to work to make our healthcare system better, and I think the work going forward is largely going to be work around the important issue of cost control. How do we control the costs in our healthcare system that have us spending 18% of our GDP on healthcare when the number 2 nation, Switzerland, spends 11% of their GDP on healthcare? And that extent of spending in the GDP means high premiums for families, high premiums for businesses. So cost control is what we need to do going forward. And that's, you know, there's all kinds of cost control strategies I work on, but I certainly wouldn't take all these important pieces and cast them aside and then hope that Congress does, you know, something in the next 10 or 15 or 20 years to address them.
Let's talk about Congress for a second.
Yeah.
In Congress doing something in the next 10, 15, 20 years, because there is a great frustration in Congress.
Thought.
And in fact, you know, your friend Mark Warner, who you brought up before, has been contemplating running for governor again because he's so fed up with the frustration. He's tried harder than anybody. He went to Washington with the singular purpose of being exactly what you said, being a gang of 6 or 14 or whatever, and working on bipartisan legislation. He's been frustrated. There's been frustration with the Senate leadership. Harry Reid has kept a budget from being voted on for 3 years, and there's a lot of angst, maybe some of it very justifiable from the other side about how the Senate has been run. And you want to be part of it.
That sounds like is that an accusation? Or
yes, exactly. You want this job. Mr. Kaine, you won the election. Now let me tell you what you won. So talk about how you really achieve this. You know, when you're a governor, you know, you wait, General Assembly disposes, you sign the legislation. It's a great job. Being the Senate, you're one of 100, and it can be very frustrating. You've got this the filibuster rules up there, the 60-vote majorities, and the rules seem to, make it difficult to get anything done. You want bipartisanship. How does one guy get up there and do something about it?
Well, one person can't, but it will only happen if a succession of one people try. When I was thinking about running after Jim Webb's announcement, I talked to John Warner, who's a very, very dear friend. He doesn't endorse. He says, now that I'm out, I'm pleasantly observing, but I don't feel a need to get involved. But he did say something, that I really have thought a lot about in the 18 months since we talked, which was, I said, Tim, if it were 1978 and you were thinking about running for Senate, I'd say if you had a 2% chance of winning, you should run because it's such a spectacular way to serve your country. He said, I can't tell you that today in that unequivocal way that this is the best place to serve because of the gridlock, etc. He said, but it's not sick building syndrome and it's not in the water supply. It's just in the character and inclinations of people who walk into the building every day. And that means that people could walk into the building tomorrow and resolve it to be different, and it would be different. And he said, we just need more people to walk into the building with the strategy of making it different. Both Mark Warner, who is frustrated, he's quite frustrated, and the president have said to me separately, the Senate's about 4 or 5 votes away from a mutiny right now. Not necessarily the mutiny of we're going to vote out Mitch McConnell and we're going to vote out Harry Reid, but a mutiny of a different kind. Wow, I had to work awful hard to get here. And I did a lot of things in my life before I got here. Why would I get here and then just get in line and just do whatever I was told? One of the things I most love about Senator Webb, and there's a lot of things I love about you, but one of the things I most love is, hey, woe be it to you if you try to tell him to get in line and just do it. You do what you say. He is going to listen. And I've seen Senator Webb change his mind on things. He's a good listener. If he takes a position and you can come and you can persuade him, then he'll mull it and he'll change his mind, but he's not going to do anything because somebody else says, hey, get in line and do this. There's a growing number of senators. Mark's gang of 8 now is not just about the budget. It's really more about just rebuilding the bridges of cooperation. In addition to the 8, there's a group of 25 or 30 or 40 who are sort of allies, encouraging. We want to be together. So what needs to happen, Joel, before you even get to rules and filibuster, there need to be some rule changes, is we just have to elect people who will go in and want to be part of that gang. I have a really humble little strategy. I mean, having worked together, as a mayor in a diverse city and as a governor in a diverse state, I think I've got some skills in working together, but here's how I'm going to start. I'm going to pick the Republican senator elected the same day I am. There's 33 Senate seats up. There's going to be Democratic freshmen and Republican freshmen. Who they are, I don't know, but I can guarantee there will be freshmen in both parties. If I am elected, I'm going to pick the Republican freshman that I either am already closest to or whose state is the best match for Virginia. And I'm going to try to build that one relationship right away, even before January, right away, and then try to, let's go add to that gang of however many, and we'll have one Republican and one Democrat so that we can keep it bipartisan. That's how I'm going to start. One thing, Joel, I was the National Party Chair, but I didn't burn any bridges with anybody who's in the Senate who's a current Republican. I promoted my party, but I didn't trash talk anybody. And I don't start off with my foot in a bucket with anybody in the Senate or with anybody who's running for the Senate.
But having the power is so. Look,
yeah.
You were a lieutenant governor. You didn't serve in the General Assembly, but the U.S. Senate and the General Assembly are no different in that right. Being the chairman of being a majority party is worth a whole lot. Being a minority party isn't worth a whole lot. And your life would be a whole lot better if the Democrats continue to run the Senate as they do now than if you're in the minority. So, I mean, is it all about the power? And also, you've got, look, there's a responsibility on Americans, frankly, to give you some rope, so to speak. Yeah. When you go there, maybe you got elected by Democrats, but to say, no, we elected Tim Kaine to go up there and not necessarily vote for the Democrats, but to vote for things. And that's on both parties. I mean, we've got a very bad situation right now, poisonous sort of partisan situation right now. I mean, aren't you just troubled by the whole landscape?
I am troubled, but we have to fix it. Even if we didn't know how to fix it, we would have to say dysfunction. We're not going to be the kind of nation we want tolerating the dysfunction. And, let's be honest, history would show that Congress has been good in times and bad times, good in times and bad times. I don't think history would suggest we're on a one-way path to it not working. We're in a down cycle. It can get better. It'll get better if we put the right people in. Frankly, it'll get better if we put people in who are centrists, Democrats or Republicans. The thing that's a little bit dangerous is when people who operate in the center, and I would say, a Jim Webb, he has some views on the left and some on the right, but he's independent and a centrist in many ways. When you see a Jim Webb deciding not to run again, when you see an Olympia Snowe deciding not to run again, when you see a Dick Lugar, who is a centrist, getting beat in a primary, the centrist just being dissatisfied or the centrist losing primaries is not a good thing. But what we ought to be doing is putting more people in who have that demonstrated track record of being able to work together. And here's something that I really love about being a Virginian. I don't know how it is in other states. Even though I grew up in Kansas City, the only place I've lived and worked as an adult is Virginia. Virginians expect you to work together. It is not a coincidence that the Gang of 14, John Warner was in the key place of it, and in the Gang of 6, Mark Warner's been in the key place of it. It's a tribute to both of them, sure. But it's also a tribute to the fact that they understood. That's what Virginians wanted them to do. We can be proud of our party. That's great. But look, let's be proud of our party, but still be good listeners. Let's be proud of our party, but still be willing to compromise. And as much as we might like our party, I hope we all like our nation a lot better. I know I like our nation a lot better than I like my party. I like my party, but there's not a competition between what I think about my party and what I think about my country.
So one of the questions is, what measures would you take to level the playing field for small business? Small business, everybody talks about, we've got to help small businesses. Lower taxes for small businesses, get out of the way of small businesses with regulations and such. I got a small business. I'm not asking for anything here, but what do you do to help grow the small businesses that we're told are the engines of job creation in this country?
And although that's a cliche, it is also, in fact, completely true. I mean, the job growth is almost all out of the small business sector, the small businesses, the startups. I grew up in a house, my dad ran an ironworking and welding shop. And it was 4 employees in a bad year, and it was 7 employees in a good year, plus my 2 brothers, me and my mom. And that was the business. And this was a business that he had for 25 years. These small businesses are really the backbone of the American economy. What does it mean to level the playing field for small businesses? Well, there's a lot of small businesses who pay federal corporate income tax, and GE doesn't. I know a small business in Charlottesville. It's a really dynamic business that does a 3D printing process called lithographic printing that will enable them to make components to like MRI machines and things like that. And they do it in a joint venture with one of the largest companies, multinational companies, Siemens AG from Germany. And the guy, Mike Appleby, who runs this company, says, I love that partnership. I love being a small business and having Siemens say, I like your technology, let's joint venture. He said, the only thing I hate is every dollar we make, we split it 50-50. And I know they're not paying taxes and I am. And I'm a little guy. So we have small businesses that get treated differently than big businesses in the tax code. We have small businesses that have a very difficult time getting access to capital, getting loans. We have small businesses who could really be advantaged if they could have some help finding export customers. But a lot of federal export policies help businesses. I mean, use an example. Boeing is a great American company. We spent a lot of our efforts trying to help Boeing with exports, but they already know who their export customers are. What about all the small businesses that can sell all around the world, but they don't have the ability to know who export customers are? So let's broaden our effort in export assistance and also in government procurement. I worked really hard as governor. When I got into office, 13% of the goods and services we bought in Virginia, we bought from small businesses. By the time I left, small women and minority-owned businesses. By the time I left, it was 40%. We really pushed the acquisition of goods and services from small businesses because we knew they were the job creators, and it would most likely have the greatest benefit to the economy. Those are the kinds of things that we can do more of at the federal level.
Well, speaking of small women, I know my wife's watching me because she wants me to go home and cut the grass before I go to Washington. So I want to thank you very much. There are some other questions that folks asked about Syria and such, and I think I know you want to stick around for a few minutes.
Yes, absolutely.
Talk to Governor Kaine, potentially Senator Kaine. I know you've had one televised debate. I guess your opponent said no debates down here in Hampton Roads, which was an issue with some of us down here. But I think you have one more debate with him.
We do. We've actually had 4 debates now. One was televised last week. I think it was Monday night. And the last debate we'll have will be Thursday. Yeah, Thursday the 18th.
Thursday I'm in a debate,
Yeah,
right?
Thursday the 18th in Blacksburg. It will be televised in the Roanoke market. At least C-SPAN will televise it more broadly, and I think it's available for pickup from other stations. I had really hoped to do a debate at Hampton Roads. The Hampton Roads Chamber and others had tried to schedule it, and we accepted, and the debate format was not accepted. An alternative that will happen, and we wanted to televise debate, is on the 19th of October, the day after the Blacksburg debate. The Hampton Roads Chamber of Commerce is having an all-day meeting, and I think George and I are speaking, 1 in the morning, 1 in the afternoon. So it won't be a debate, but we will both be here to address the issues that matter to Hampton Roads. Let me just say thanks. I really appreciate the chance to come and dialogue, and I'm excited to see a finish line, and if I have the opportunity to represent you again in the Senate, it would be a great honor. Thanks.